Since its inception in 1996, Resident Evil has managed to retain its position as the biggest name in survival horror video gaming. Despite changing both production teams, console platforms, and even audience tastes, the series has always adapted with the times to suit whatever medium it finds itself in. But whilst the main games in the series tend to be relatively well received, there are a legion of spin-off titles which run the gamut from inspired to truly dreadful. Infamous would be the best way of describing Resident Evil Gaiden, the ill-fated single handheld entry of the series on the Nintendo Game Boy range. Whilst every other entry in the series up till that point, and indeed for the next 10 years after, would focus on full-blooded console releases. Capcom was quite excited by the idea of Nintendo's soft update to the best-selling Game Boy console by providing a colour screen, and so they made internal and indeed public plans to port the original PlayStation exclusive Resident Evil to the console. They reached out to British company HotGem to develop a port in 1999 rather than develop it internally. This was meant to be a full-on remake, containing the entire game, every single room, every single cutscene, every item re-rendered using pixels designed to fit on a 160 by 144 pixel screen. To put that in perspective, a 4K screen on a modern monitor contains 360 times as many points as the custom LCD screen for the original Game Boy had. But even to look back at what was contemporary on the market, the PlayStation 1 at the time of release had 3 1/3 more screen space than the original handheld. A fairly robust prototype was produced, but as you can see, even with the best will in the world, the hardware of the handheld devices of the time simply were not up to the task. Ambitious, impressive, an incredible feat, and a technological marvel. This prototype was all of those, but it was also a terrible eyesore that exacerbated all of the worst elements of the original game's tank controls. The game was shelved mere months before its planned release, when Capcom executives got cold feet about its anticipated quality, and that was all we knew about it until 2012, when the prototype that's 90% complete was leaked online. And that was the end of Resident Evil on the Game Boy. Except it wasn't. Keen to get a release on the handheld, they turned to another British company, M4, and they asked them to develop a spin-off game. Series veterans Shinji Mikami and Hiroko Kato contributed to provide a story and general production advice, but this was largely a completely original production that drew inspiration from the parent game, but defiantly went its own direction. The game depicts Barry Burton and Leon Kennedy, the only characters to carry over from the main series, aboard a disaster-struck cruise liner trying to find a way off the ship whilst evading a bioorganic weapon hunting them down. The game is played from a top-down perspective, inviting you to navigate through the floors of the ship, finding keys and other items to unlock doors, and navigate your way through the story. Ammo and healing items are limited, so you have to judge carefully who and what you engage in combat with to conserve your stock for late-game challenges. In those terms, the game does faithfully recreate the Resident Evil formula in its generality. However, when it comes to combat, everything has changed. Battles themselves were inspired by the 1987 first-person perspective game Dungeon Master, featuring a fast-moving reticule that darts from left to right, asking the player to time their shooting or stabbing to hit approaching enemies. You can switch between weapons, and even later on in different characters, to optimise your battle abilities. The shotgun is powerful, but it has limited range, so using the pistol is preferred for far-off enemies, and the knife for any who get up close. For the times, on a handheld device, this is a fantastic battle system conceptually, with a lot to offer. The graphics really stand out here. For the 8-bit handheld, these are fantastic designs, and watching a zombie slowly turn as it spots you, and then lumber slowly forwards to finally attack once it reaches you, it's a brilliant experience that looks really good. The problem is repetition. Save for a few specific boss designs, there are only really 3 types of zombies, with a few minor palette swaps, and you will encounter these again and again and again. That impressive feeling at how hard the game is working on the first encounter saps quickly after 3 hours of watching the same 3 shapes, man, woman, and man with crowbar, shamble uselessly towards you with the same lumbering gait each time. 2 or 3 slight colour variations are all that the game has to offer, so whilst this looks impressive in itself, there either wasn't enough development time or cartridge space to offer anything more than this. Worse, the game does remember what zombies you've killed, so they don't respawn the moment you leave and then re-enter a room, but they do respawn. For a game built around backtracking through the same corridors, searching for keys and other missed items, where handgun ammo is gold dust, this really is problematic. The music is also horrifically repetitive, although it does at least react slightly to your condition and environment. But what really breaks the flow of the game is the transition from ship exploration to combat. Barry or Leon both have a gun, and so they can stop, draw their weapons and summon an aiming reticule that you navigate around the screen to shoot nearby zombies. This is an incredibly slow and fiddly process, made worse by the fact that when you're out of ammo, you have no ability to defend yourself at all. If you don't shoot them down, the first zombies reach out and grab you, holding the player in a long drawn out huddle whilst more arrive, before you eventually shake them off and begin the combat with them all up in your face. This mixed method of combat was incredibly divisive with reviewers, and the game had a very mixed reception. Gaiden itself is a Japanese word for side story, so this was always intended to be a slightly different take on the franchise. Spiritually, it gets so much right, but in execution there are glaring faults. M4 was shut down not long after this game released, which is a shame because they clearly had some talent, and the studio had been originally set up as an offshoot from another British video game studio who specialised in licensed games. These people had left Bits because they wanted to make their own original title, but unfortunately to make ends meet, M4 had to focus on licensed games like this. Looking at the production team, there are some noteworthy names such as Stefan Barnett, the artist and game designer who had previously worked outside of video games, producing sets for theatres, props, art for children's books, and even as a model maker for the pepperoni adverts. This was his first foray into gaming, and I have to say that for what it does contain, the final product looks fantastic for a Game Boy Color title. Furthermore, James Cox went on to be the head of development for PlayStation Home, a fairly significant Sony release that launched the PS3 generation, and several other members of the team have carried on working in the industry. But that would be it for Resident Evil on handhelds for nearly a decade. The twist ending at the end of Gaiden is incompatible with what would go on to happen in Resident Evil 4, meaning that this game has been effectively written out of the franchise. Interestingly though, when Capcom tried again with Resident Evil Revelations on the 3DS, they picked up the idea of a derelict cruise liner, so clearly they had some inspiration from that first original game. Gaiden itself, however, is probably best forgotten as an oddity in the franchise history. It's an interesting experiment, one worthy of looking at, but hardly significant in itself. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this short episode of A Friend Remembers. If you like the Resident Evil franchise, I'm speaking now to ask you to participate in a community event that I'm planning for this autumn. The franchise is several decades old now and it's got many great games, but I'm looking to conduct a grand vote to try and rank the games and work out what the fan favourites are. We've just looked here at one of the worst, but there's some really fantastic experience out there, and I want you all to contribute. I'm looking for audio or video contributions from other YouTubers or other members of the community, any members of the community, to share their thoughts or comments about the game. Stand up and speak out about your favourite game, or alternatively, if there's something bothering you in one of them, stick the boot in and get it off your chest. Please also submit ratings for out of 10 for any and every Resident Evil game, whether it's core entry or spin-off, anything that you've played and experienced for yourself. Send me your ranking and point specifically at your one single favourite game. Let us know what it is. If you're interested in collaborating, please contact me on either Twitter, through our Discord, or just comment on this video below and I'll get back in touch with more details. The more people who contribute and or vote, the more we'll have to discuss when this YouTube community video comes out in a few months.